join us now at the end of the Hildegard Way. Our station is at the shrine of St. Hildegard in the Pilgrimage Church of Eibingen. There, Sister Hiltrud welcomes the pilgrims and explains Hildegard's whole teaching in a truly spiritual performance.
Ich möchte gerne einen Liedtext, den ich auf Deutsch zitieren, den ich sehr liebe, aus dem Lied O Qua Mirabilis est. Wie wunderbar ist das Wissen im Herzen Gottes. Ewigkeit her, jedes Geschöpf hat erschaut den Gott, der erblickt ins Antlitz des Menschen, den er gebildet. Er sah all sein Werk insgesamt, seine Menschengestalt. Wunderbar, was der Hauch den Menschen zum Leben erweckte. Das sind wir alle. Nach der heiligen Hildegard ist jeder Mensch dem Hauch Gottes, dem Kuss der Liebe zum Leben erweckt worden. Die Basis meines Seins ist nicht weniger und nicht mehr, unfassbar, Gottes Liebe. Ich bin da, weil Gott mich gewollt hat. Und jeder Einzelne, ganz persönlich, unabhängig von seiner Biografie, von seinen Eltern.
What do I think about Hildegard of Bingen? And why do I wish to go for a pilgrimage on the Hildegard Way? These are the first questions for pilgrims at the beginning of the Hildegard Way. Hildegard of Bingen has been called seeress, composer, physician, and prophetess. She lived in the 12th century in the land of the river Nahe and in Bingen on the Rhine, in the middle of today's Germany. Even though Hildegard already gained fame in her life, it was only 833 years after her death that in 2012 she was canonized and promoted as Doctor of the Universal Church. She received this honor only as the fourth woman amongst more than over 30 men. I am Dr. Annette Esser.
I'm a theologian and teacher of art and geography, by the way. So I've been working on Hildegard for 27 years. I've studied in Germany and America, so this is all my perspectives. I'm looking at Hildegard, and also from that literature coming from these different languages in German and English.
After receiving my doctorate in theology at the Catholic University of Nijmegen in 2007, I founded the Scivias Institute for Art and Spirituality together with other theologians, artists and psychotherapists in Cologne. Thereafter I moved to the home of my maternal family in Bad Kreuznach, near Bingen. When we heard about that Pope Benedict XVI planned to promote St. Hildegard, we were very excited about this. Thus, in October 2012, we organized an international conference in Bingen with lectures and workshops in order to celebrate Hildegard.
Now we are going to put our hands here and feel a bit this resonance going up and down. So leave the resonance to go up.
There
Myself, I got more and more moved by Hildegard, and I made a sculpture from clay, according to a description in a letter by Abbess Tengswich of Andernach to Abbess Hildegard of Bingen. It shows the saint as a virgin with open hair, a bridal rests, the Lamb of Christ in the front, and crosses to the side and the back of the head.
The idea was, when I went on the Camino Santiago in Spain, to have such a pilgrimage route here in the land of Hildegard. I have initiated that, and it was like running into open doors everywhere. Everyone thought that was a good idea, and many people already had the idea to have a Hildegard Way, because this is such a beautiful landscape, but it is rarely known.
We followed this up as a project organized by the local Naheland Tourism and supported by the European Union. And on September the 9th, 2017, we successfully opened the new Hildegard of Bingen pilgrimage route, the Hildegard von Bingen Pilgerwanderweg, at the Disibodenberg, with sisters from St. Hildegard's Abbey. O quam mirabilis, how wonderful. With these words of Saint Hildegard, that we also will hear as a song, I welcome you very much. It is 3 years ago that I was sitting in my kitchen with Annette Esser, having a cup of coffee and talking about a heartfelt wish to create a pilgrimage route in the land of Saint Hildegard, the Hildegard Way. We were both enthusiastic. Our only question was, will others be that too? For of course, one can dream about many things, but one can never realize this alone. And I have to admit that at the very beginning, when we came up with our idea, many nodded friendly and said, okay, go on with it. But in the course of the 3 years, one could notice that enthusiasm was growing. Wherever we came, there were people who said, oh, this is wonderful. I join in. This is super. This was just what we needed. We are here in the land of Hildegard, and we do this together. In the name of our mother Dorothea Flandera, the 40th successor of Saint Hildegard and abbess of Rupertsberg and Eibingen, and the whole convent of St. Hildegard Abbey, I also wish to kindly greet you to the presentation of the Hildegard of Bingen pilgrimage route. It is a wonderful sign of openness and awareness for the spiritual experiences in nature that today this Christian tradition of pilgrimage walking is booming and gaining enthusiasm again. This is just that which has coined the theology of Saint Hildegard, her theology of creation, in which she shows how much God is present and can be experienced in ourselves, in our environment, and in the whole world. We regard it as a great gift that now this sacred spiritual teaching can also be experienced in the Hildegard of Bingen Pilgrimage Way.
Ja, ich freue mich wirklich sehr, dass das heute hier zustande kommt. Und Künstler, die Musiker, aber auch die Künstler beschäftigen sich auch gerne mit Hildegard von Bingen, weil sie so...
Yes, I'm very pleased that this is happening today. We, that is Naarland Tourism, and me as initiator and also as a foundress of the Scivias Institute, now also wish to offer pilgrimage tours on these 10 stages of the Hildegard Way. Of course, everybody can walk as much and wherever he or she likes to, for a day, half a day, a weekend, a week. But in future, we will also offer to once walk the whole way. We also offer these tours for groups who come from abroad, international groups. It is also important for us that the tableaux of the Hildegard Way are written in German and English language, for we know that there is an international interest in Hildegard. We will offer these things. This route leads in 10 stages over 140 kilometers from the rocky mountains of Idar-Oberstein through the Nahe River Valley to Bingen on the Rhine, and finally across the river to St. Hildegard's Abbey.
Most people who look for Hildegard, who search for Hildegard, go to Bingen or to the Disibodenberg, and that's about it. And they don't know the historical sites like Sponheim, the monastery, the castle where Hildegard probably was brought in the age of 8. And a lot of historical things have been reviewed over the last 20 years, and we had to rewrite the history of Hildegard. So when I thought of the Hildegard Way in the whole, I thought of going to all those historical sites, but also to follow, thinking about meditation, to really follow Hildegard herself, not to think about what I think about Hildegard, but what Hildegard really thought was important. The first book that made her famous worldwide is the Liber Scivias, the book Know the Ways. I mean, that is really appropriate for a pilgrimage, to think of how to know the ways and, to know the ways. And in this book of Hildegard, there are 27 visions, which are not just some assembled just by chance, but they follow a systematic order from creation to incarnation through the Last Judgment. It is really a systematic theology and spirituality in images, in visionary images. So on the Hildegard Way, really we follow this Liber Scivias with the 27 visions, starting at Idar-Oberstein, and the last one will be in Stromberg then at the St. Jacob's Church with the final judgment.
We are following Hildegard's Liber Scivias, and at each of these 27 tableaux there is a question for the pilgrim to think about. What do I think? Why am I on the Hildegard Way? What do I think the cosmos is? Where is man in the cosmos? What is the origin of evil? What has also been there before creation? What do I think about a good community or the church should be like? And what do I think of all this time of us in being? And will there be a last judgment or last justice for all of us? What is happening on earth in this way?
So really we are following Hildegard's own thoughts, which is sometimes very heavy. But I try to put it in a way that it is not just for kind of already believing Christians, but really for all who are kind of searching on the way, also for all kinds of secular people or for people who are interested in Eastern meditation, but of course also for Christians, for Catholics and for Protestants. This is an ecumenical project.
But by the way, 27 visions and also 31 tableaux on the historical sites and all the works of Hildegard, which include her Liber Physica, with all the books on herbs, on trees, on fish, on birds, on animals, on stones, on reptiles, on metals.
this is also very important, and her art of healing in the Liber Causa et Curae. So it's really, this is historic sites and works of Hildegard.
To discover it's a land of Celts, to discover that the earth of Sponheim were very important in this landscape. And now, more and more pilgrims come here to the land of Hildegard at all times of the year.
We are on an international pilgrimage, and so there are people from America, from Ireland, from South Africa. I've been with pilgrims from Korea, from Canada, from Brazil, and they come here to people who have hardly heard and learned anything about Hildegard. They might have heard that there are these spelt products which are more popular now, Dinkel, and they might have heard that Hildegard does something on the art of healing, but they don't know, so maybe fennel tea or, you know, very, very simple things. That's what they know about Hildegard. And they don't know, they know maybe Hildegard has lived here, but really it's not so much knowledge. And then they encounter Americans who have studied her works, have really read it, know how to sing the music spontaneously. It's a real surprise for people here that people from so far away come here just to get to know something on Hildegard in her own land, in her own homeland. So people here who live in these little villages are surprised, and I think Americans are surprised that people here know so little about them. You know, one interesting encounter I had with an American professor of music. She knew how to sing Hildegard songs, and we were there at the foot of the Disibodenberg, meeting a man who told us that his grandmother still told the story about the day when Hildegard moved in with Jutta entered the Disibodenberg monastery, that this story with all her people on horses and, you know, all this story was told over centuries. So there's still an oral tradition. That was also a surprise for all of us to find out about.
In the hot summer of 2019, we decided to also make a series of videos on the stations of the Hildegard Way, to which I had written text.
The idea of the videos is really to give not a description of history and facts, but to put Hildegard and what she thinks about that part of her homeland into a picture. So I wrote 9 texts on when Hildegard speaks herself, and that comes out of all my knowledge working on Hildegard. So I write as Hildegard speaks herself about the land where she is.
She speaks on stones and the heavenly Jerusalem and so on. Or she talks about her entrance in the Disibodenberg or the foundation of the Rupertsberg. So we show pictures of that landscape. So this is really for meditation. This is for reflection. This is for the pilgrim who wants to come or has been here and wants a little bit more about it. And to show this beautiful landscape here, the beautiful area where she lived, and everything which is here, trees and fields and rocks and rivers and vineyards.
And to show that in combination of what Hildegard thought. So it's more spiritual, imaginative than a dry documentary.
We invite you now for a journey to the land of Hildegard. We invite you to listen to the story of her life. Welcome to the Hildegard Pilgrimage.
Ich habe immer schon gesprochen, das Wort Gott gebraucht. Gott, wer ist Gott? Ist schwierig. Bei Hildegard, sie hat Bilder dafür. Sie spricht vom Feuer, vom Licht, von der blitzenden Flamme, von der Wolke, die dahin zieht. Und diese Stimme, die sie dann hört, das Licht sie eintaucht, sie offenbart sich für uns, dass wir Menschen, jeder Mensch ist ganz persönlich eingeladen, ja, Gottes Antlitz zu spüren, zu erleben, natürlich durch die Schöpfung hindurch.
Join us now on the beginning of the Hildegard Way. Our station is at the old marketplace of Ida Oberstein, where we are looking up to the church in the rocks, the Felsenkirche. We listen to Hildegard speaking about precious stones and the heavenly Jerusalem.
Anno Domini 1098. I was born on this side of Gaul, which is full of precious stones. This was after the turning point of the times when the glowing teaching of the apostles had already become lax, and men of God had begun to waver. In this time,
virgins like me were called by God to show strength and to proclaim the word of God. Well, jewels have always delighted me. As we all know,
there was already bdellium and onyx stone in the Garden of Paradise, and the devil recoils in fear from gemstones. Thus, I believe that precious stones can also protect humans and even have certain healing effects on them. After all, the heavenly Jerusalem is also built from 12 jewels that can all be found in this area here, just as it is written in the Revelation of John. The city lies 4 squares.
Its length the same as its width. The wall is built of jasper, while the city is pure gold, clear as glass. The foundations of the wall of the city are adorned with every jewel. The first was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates are 12 pearls. Each of the gates is a single pearl, and the street of the city is pure gold, transparent as glass.
Now, I believe that in this period of Salvation history now, we are called to build up the city of God till the end of times.
The Hildegard Way then leads us from the Nahe Valley through the forest into the midst of the Hunsrück mountain range. We come to the medieval town of Herrstein. Join us now on the Hildegard Way from the town of Herrstein to the village of Nidda-Hosenbach. According to recent historical research, Hildegard was born in this remote place, which was dominated by the manor house of her family. Our station is at the Protestant church of Nidda-Hosenbach. The church contains a facsimile edition of the Liber Scivias. We listen to Hildegard speaking about her family and childhood. My father Hildebrecht was a lord of Bermersheim and Nidda-Hosenbach. My noble mother Mechthild came from Merxheim. She gave birth to 10 children. You will probably know my brothers, Trudwin, who as the oldest is the heir of our manor house,
Roricus, who later became a cantor in Mainz Cathedral, and Hugo, who became a canon in Tolai. You will also have heard of my 4 sisters, Irmgard, Jutta, Odila, and Clemencia. As the 10th child, my parents dedicated me to God while sighing, just as one gives the tithe of the harvest to the church. Later on, I truly accepted that my parents wished me to live a religious life. When at age 16 I took the veil in the Monastery of St. Disibod. I will talk more about this later.
At that time, I grew up well sheltered in the circle of my siblings, and I can only say that I had a very good life. Our noble family was related to the Earls of Sponheim, and of course we had servants, and the farmers from the surrounding land had to deliver goods in kind to our manor house. For everyone, there was always much work to do, but we also celebrated the feasts of the Church: Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, St. John's, and All Saints. Sometimes my father rode to the seat of the Archbishop in Golden Mainz.
This big city on the river had always impressed him again with its massive walls and grand churches.
From there he brought back precious fabrics and spices from faraway countries, and once also a Mainz armor, just like the ones that were also sold in London.
We also heard much about what was going on in the empire, about the imprisonment of King Henry by his own son in Böckelheim Castle, and about the return of Archbishop Ruthard of Mainz after years of exile.
As a child, of course, I did not understand much of these political events. I was often ill, and I saw things that others found only peculiar or at best miraculous. In spite of all the love in the circle of my family, I was also often not understood, and I was a lonely soul. From Nidda-Hosenbach, the Hildegard Way leads through forests and lawns to the village of Bergen. There is a guest house and a Hildegard Pilgrimage station. The way from Bergen takes its course to Kirn, thereby passing the Brook Valley, Trübenbachtal. Join us now for a time at the Disibodenberg, which is at the center of the Hildegard Way. Hildegard lived here for almost 40 years of her life. We are in the early morning at the old ruin site, just at the time of sunrise. That is, at the time of the Lauds, the monastic morning praise of God. We are standing in the new Hildegard Chapel, where Hildegard speaks about her entrance into the Monastery of St. Disibod. On All Saints' Day 1112, after the incarnation of Christ, I, a virgin of 14 years, entered the Monastery of St. Disibod. This was together with my teacher Jutta of Sponheim, who by then was already 20 years of age, and to whom I had been entrusted 6 years before. With us was another virgin whose name was Jutta as well. The Benedictine monks, who themselves had only come to the holy mountain of St. Disibod 6 years before, under the patronage of Archbishop Ruthard of Mainz, were very pleased about our arrival. For with the foundation of the women's cell under Magistra Jutta, their monastery would now become a double convent. More and more of these were founded in the empire at this time. Our new magistra, Lady Jutta, took the veil from Abbot Burkhard on the same day. I only took the veil 2 years later when I was 16. In the almost 40 years that I lived on the Disibodenberg, where I became the new magistra after Jutta's death in 1136, I have seen and learned a lot. I enjoyed participating in Benedictine life with the liturgy of the hours, the singing of the psalms and high mass on solemnities. I loved the music. I have to say that for the longest time we lived on a building site. Thus, the foundation stone of our huge St. Nicholas church had already been laid Anno Domini 1108. Yet only in 1143 was the church finally consecrated by Bishop Henry of Mainz, who then also dedicated the high altar to St. John. When the bones of St. Ursula and her 11,000 virgins had been found in Cologne in 1120, a part of her relics came to us on the Disibodenberg. Ursula, who had loved the Son of God in true faith and who had abandoned man and world, was my favorite saint. I have composed a whole cycle of songs for her solemnity on October 21. In 1143, we could finally bury the relics of St. Disibod in the church crypt. At the request of Abbot Hellinger and the Disibodenberg monks, I compiled the vita of this Gaelic-speaking Irish monks 30 years later. He had come to the Franconian Empire in the dark period of the 7th century, and he had settled down where his walking stick put into the earth turned green, where a white hind poured a well of fresh water from the earth and where 2 rivers united. This was exactly here where I have lived for 40 years. We invite you now to spend some time at the Disibodenberg, to sit, meditate, pray, and maybe to walk through the labyrinth at the women's cell.
Ich habe immer schon gesprochen, das Wort Gott gebraucht. Gott, wer ist Gott? Ist schwierig. Bei Hildegard, sie hat Bilder dafür. Sie spricht vom Feuer, vom Licht, von der blitzenden Flamme, von der Wolke, die dahin zieht. Und diese Stimme, die sie dann hört, das Licht sie eintaucht, sie offenbart sich für uns, dass wir Menschen, jeder Mensch ist ganz persönlich eingeladen, ja, Gottes Antlitz zu spüren, zu erleben, natürlich durch die Schöpfung hindurch. Hildegard erlebt in dieser Schau das Geheimnis Gott als Gemeinschaft, als Beziehung, in miteinander durchströmen, durchfließen, durcheinander immer wieder.
Our station is beside the old Protestant church on top of the hill. There we listen to Hildegard speaking about her visionary experience.
Lately, many people have called me the Seeress from the Rhine, and many know that I have composed songs to the honor of God, the Virgin, and the saints. How can I explain that all this belongs together? Yes, I have always been a seeing listener and a listening seeress. in the 3rd year of my life, I saw such a great light that my soul trembled. Yet because of my childhood, I was unable to talk about it. Until my 15th year, I saw much, and I talked about some of it, so that those who heard it were amazed and wondered where and who it came from. Therefore, I wondered myself that I, while deeply looking into my soul, my outward side remained, and that I heard about this from no other soul. Therefore, I kept secret this vision, and I saw in my soul as much as I could do. Only at the age of 43 have I revealed myself about this to my dear brother Volmar. And behold, in the 43rd year of my earthly course, as I was gazing with great fear and trembling attention at a heavenly vision, I saw a great splendor in which resounded a voice from heaven saying to me, "O fragile human, ashes of ashes and filth of filth, say and write what you see and hear." But first of all, at that time, a heavy illness had laid me low. Then I had to acknowledge that I could no longer resist God's will, that I reveal myself about my visions.
In my book, Know the Ways, the Liber Scivias, I then put down all my visions that I had since then. In these visions, God gave me an insight in the position of the human being in the cosmos and his story with mankind, from creation to incarnation and redemption till the last judgment. And much later in my life, when I was already 79 years old, it was a curious Walloon monk, Guibert de Gambloux, to write about my visionary experience myself.
Thus, my vision reaches out to the most diverse people.
Even in faraway countries and places, I receive this vision not with my physical ears nor in the fantasy of my heart, and also not through the mediation of my 5 senses. Rather, I see and hear this only in my soul and with my eyes open, so that I never suffer the exhaustion of an ecstasy. In this vision, I have seen the living light, and in the shadow of the living light, many scriptures, words, virtues, and some works of the human beings have literally blazed. Everything I have seen in this light I keep in my memory for a long time, because in this vision I see, hear, and know all at once, and at the same time I learn what I know and see. From St. Johannesburg, the Hildegard Way then leads to the medieval castle Schloss Daun, and then through the vineyard mountains to the village of Weiler. Join us now on the Hildegard Way from Monsinghen to the Disibodenberg. Our station is in the herbal garden behind the old Protestant church of Monsinghen, where we listen to Hildegard speaking about her art of healing. Many people speak of me as the abbess who practices medicine, and even call me a physician.
Yet some people think that my knowledge about the healing and harming effect of certain plants
and about the origin and healing cures of certain illnesses has been drummed into me in a kind of divine dictate. Of course, this was not that simple. In my time, on the Disibodenberg, I learned much about Benedictine monastic medicine. We had a cloister garden and a hospice into which the sick and suffering,
and also pregnant women were brought, and in which I spent much of my time. Thus, I learned about many illnesses and diseases, and also about the things of creation, conception and birth of the human being outside paradise, about which I would not have known otherwise. Also, at the Disibodenberg, as in all important Benedictine monasteries,
we had a huge library and a scriptorium. The Benedictine rule ora et labora et lege, pray and work and read, was valid for us. As magistra, the teacher at the women's cell, I could study there with the support of our learned monks. Thus, I learned about the Corpus Hippocratium's teaching of the four humours, the teaching on the temperaments of Gallianus, and the new canon of medicine according to Avicenna, as well as other Greek and Arab scholars.
I must also speak here about one secret. In my about 40 years' time as a recluse and a magistra on the Disibodenberg, I lived in seclusion, but I was not confined. Especially after Jutta's death, I took the opportunity instead to observe and explore the surrounding nature as much as I could. Thus, I often sat at the river Nahe and Klan that flow around our holy mountain. There, I looked at the fish in the water and the birds in the air. I sensed the healing power of the elements, and sometimes I washed my face in the river. Also, God gave me the gift of, how shall I call it properly? Well, of talking with plants and animals to realize or understand what kind of healing or harming effect certain plants could have for certain human illnesses. For that matter, it is true in a certain way that my medical knowledge did not just come from books, but came to me from heaven. Thanks to God, our Creator, that later on I could write down all this knowledge in my medical oeuvre, the Liber Physica and Causae et Curae.
The Hildegard Way then leads along the barefoot path. At the end of the day, we arrive at the foot of the Disibodenberg. Our station is in front of the tower of Sponheim Castle. Hildegard was probably brought here to Jutta of Sponheim in the age of 8. We listen to how Hildegard speaks about her 6 years older relative.
Jutta of Sponheim was my teacher. I was her closest confidant and became her successor as the second magistra on the Disibodenberg. For 30 years we lived together, yet for a long time I have restrained from talking about her, and I have left it to others to compile the vita of Lady Jutta the recluse. There is a reason for all this that not only has to do with our mutual life, but also with Jutta's early death. I was given to my relative Jutta of Sponheim at the age of 8. By that time, she was a virgin of 14 years. As was customary for sons and daughters of nobility, I could also receive a good education there. For girls, different than for boys, who had to learn the virtues of a Christian knight, this education encompassed not only fine handcraft, such as embroidery and weaving, but also learning to do calligraphy. Jutta, who since her early childhood had been taught reading and writing by her mother, Duchess Sophie of Sponheim, already had a good education. From Jutta, I learned the Psalms. That means I learned to read and write Latin. But there was also another reason why I was brought to Jutta. Jutta was a beautiful lady, beloved by everyone. Yet, even though many noble and rich men wished to marry her, during a severe illness at the age of 12, she herself had pledged to forego marriage. And against the will of her relatives, she had been secretly consecrated by Bishop Ruthard of Mainz. As Jutta now wished to undergo the religious education of the pious widow Uda of Gölheim, who lived the habit of the holy religion,
it seemed reasonable that I too, who had already been consecrated to God at birth by my parents, was given into her care. Now, Jutta, like our teacher Uda of Gölheim, was fascinated by the strict reform movements of our time. In order to prevent her from going also to a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, her brother Duke Megenhard established a foundation for a women's cell at the newly founded Benedictine monastery on the Disibodenberg, and he convinced his sister that she could better pursue her wish to renounce the world in this monastery. Thus, on All Saints' Day, Anno Domini 1112, we entered the monastery of St. Disibod as recluses. I remember well that at dawn we were waiting in the monastery's hospice to be welcomed by a pious widow. Trudwib, who lived on the holy mountain and had just joined the early lords, had a mysterious vision of the life and death of Jutta that later on became true. For Jutta truly wished to be buried with Christ and to gain with him the glory of resurrection. She did this by strict asceticism, secret self-flagellation, and by wearing an iron chain on her naked body. Sometimes in winter she walked in the snow barefoot. She pursued her fasting and self-abnegation to an extent that we were all concerned that she would eat enough.
Even though Jutta was very friendly to everyone and had far-reaching contacts with many people,
we had to witness how she got weaker and weaker. Her early death on Christmas Day was not a surprise to us. This was in 1136. Personally, what touched me most was then when we saw and moistened the dead body of our beloved mother and magistra with our tears.
It was then that we found amongst countless marks on her body that the chain she had worn on her flesh had already engraved 3 furrows around her body. I, who had been dealing with the art of healing for all these years, decided for myself not to become as strict and hostile to the body as Jutta. Yet, as her closest confidant, who wished to honor her heritage, I have not talked about this further more to anyone else. Instead, I have developed my art of healing.
From Sponheim Castle, we walk to Sponheim Monastery. This 12th century Romanesque church is the only remaining building from Hildegard's lifetime on the whole Hildegard Way. It was built by Jutta's brother Meginhard of Sponheim.
Have I already told you that Jutta never intended to enter a monastery at first? For after her mother had died, she had decided instead to leave the country and her father's house, and for the sake of the Lord, go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. As you all know, there are 3 major pilgrimages for the whole of Christianity. The pilgrimage to Jerusalem, in order to walk in the steps of Christ, the Lord. To Rome, in order to visit the grave of the Apostle Peter. And to Santiago de Compostela, in order to visit the grave of the Lord's brother James. In her time, Jutta's great-grandmother had died on her way to Santiago, just like many pilgrims who did not return alive after a year-long pilgrimage. And the Crusaders had brought much news from the holy city of Jerusalem from their crusade in 1096. Jutta's brother Meginhard also know about the bloody crusades against the Jews in the cities of Mainz, Speyer and Worms in the same year. Because he found that he could not bear the absence of his sister, he endeavored to hinder the pilgrimage of his sister. And he convinced his sister, by then age 20, to enter there as a new magistra. Well, this was together with me, who was 14 years of age by then. People went to see the miraculous images and the relics of saints in churches and monasteries. In 1164, the Emperor Barbarossa and Archbishop Reinald of Dassel brought the most precious relics of the 3 holy kings, the Magi, from Milano in Italy to Cologne. Later, in my Rupertsberg Abbey, there was a miraculous image of the Holy Virgin Mary to which people streamed. Well, for myself, I have not been on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, yet within the Empire I had a far-reaching correspondence, and finally I have traveled a great deal in order to proclaim the word of the Lord. Known as a trumpet of God, even as a poor, fearful little female, I was urged to speak to clergymen, doctors, and other scholars in important places. I traveled along the river Main to monastic communities in Mainz, Wertheim, Würzburg, Kitzingen, Ebrach, and Bamberg. Along the river Mosel, I traveled southwards to Lothringen, to Metz and Kauftal, and have been preaching publicly in the cathedral town of Trier. Along the Rhine, I came to Boppard, Andernach, Siegburg, and Cologne up to Verden.
Join us now on the Hildegard Way to Bingen. We invite you to listen to the extraordinary story of how Hildegard gained fame as a woman and how she founded the Rupertsberg Monastery in Bingen.
I have held back the visions that I had had since early childhood. Even during my first time at the Disibodenberg, I entrusted myself only to Jutta. This was because I feared the lack of understanding and gossip of the people. I would never have talked about my visionary experience if God had not forced me to do so by means of a severe illness. When I recognized that I could no longer refuse the will of God, I entrusted myself to Brother Volmar,
because a kind of curious questioning that many people adhere to is foreign to his nature. Volmar liked to listen to these incredible appearances and ordered me to secretly write them down until he could see of what kind they were and where they came from. Yet, when he recognized that they came from God, he entrusted himself to Abbot Kuno, and from then on worked with me on them with great eagerness.
After Abbot Kuno too had pondered about the unusual event and had found that for God nothing is impossible, he called the most knowledgeable monks and submitted to them what he had heard in order to judge it. He then asked me for my writings and visions and gave the advice to me to put down what God conveyed to me. Yet because of his own judgment seemed not sufficient to him, he went to the Mother Church in Mainz and reported what he had heard to Archbishop Henry and the Cathedral chapter. Thereby he also submitted the writings that I had done most recently. This was the beginning of my Liber Scivias, which means know the ways. O fragile human, ashes of ashes, and filth of filth, say and write what you see and hear. As a faint-hearted woman, I did not want to leave my course, that I believed to be God's course, just in the hands of these men. Therefore, I gathered all my courage, and in 1147 I wrote a letter to Abbot Bernhard of Clairvaux. This honorable abbot had also been the teacher of Pope Eugene III. I entrusted myself to him as una paupercula feminea forma, a poor little female. And I asked him to judge whether my visions that disconcerted me since early childhood could be from God. At first, Bernhard hesitated to answer, and I wrote a second letter. Eventually, he bestowed on me with an answer, in which he shared his happiness about this great gift of grace with me, yet at once he admonished me also to remain humble. Despite Bernhard's hesitance, in retrospect, this letter was a blessing. For when in the same year Pope Eugene stayed at the Synod of Trier and the Bishop of Mainz brought up the subject, Bernhard interceded for me. The Pope, who had sent 2 legates to the nearby Disibodenberg and who had read from my writings, then followed Bernhard's suggestion. He sent an honorable letter to me in which he gave me permission to proclaim everything that I recognized in the Holy Spirit, and in which he encouraged me to go on with recording my visions. This is how I became well known, and how my fame as a seer grew throughout the whole empire. More and more virgins wished now to come into my care as my students at the Disibodenberg women's cell. Finally, this also resulted in the fact that our cell soon became too small for all of us. Anno Domini 1150, when I was 52 years old of age, and therefore already an old woman, I moved with 19 of my sisters to the Rupertsberg in Bingen in order to establish there a women's convent according to the rule of Saint Benedict. The consideration of the idea to found our own women's monastery had already matured when I was struck by a heavy illness. It was then that God taught me in a vision that our women's cell should be removed from the place where I was consecrated to God, the Monastery of St. Disibodenberg. And the Holy Ghost then showed me the site where the river Nahe flows into the river Rhine. That is a hill that earlier had been named for the confessor Rupertus as a site for our new convent. Of course, I also knew that this site would be in the center of the empire, where ships with goods from faraway countries were transported on the river and where visitors from all over the world could reach us. Still, the monastery developed splendidly. In 1177, we were visited by the Walloon monk Liber of Gambloux, who admired the beautiful atmosphere of peace and joy and delight. In a letter to his brothers, he wrote about this. This monastery has not been established by an emperor or a bishop or a powerful or rich man of this earth, but by a poor woman who had moved into this area. Within a short time, only in 27 years, the convent has highly developed, as well in its monastic spirit as also in its exterior construction. It does not consist of magnificent yet imposing and spacious buildings as are fitting for nuns. And what is well arranged is that one has routed water pipes into every working room. Not only for the many guests that the house is never lacking, and also for the various employers, of which there are many, but also the nearly 50 sisters, all expenditures for clothing and nourishment are sufficiently taken care of. Guibert of Gambloux also admired how we, mother and daughters, treat each other, how I teach my sisters, how I give advice to people seeking help, and how I am bound up fully with the writing of letters and books. So, I finally wish to say that this is true, that my life in our convent in Bingen on the Rhine, in spite of all the hardship and testing, has been a great joy and a great gift to me till the end of my life.
Warum sollen wir in dieser Beziehung lebendig sein? Wir sollen immer leben. Die Botschaft des dreifaltigen Gottes, Gottes Botschaft, der im unzugänglichen Lichte lebt, nicht zu schauen für uns heute, noch nicht. Er lädt uns ein, dass wir immer leben sollen. Über 80, über 100, über den Tod hinaus. Der Mensch soll immer leben. Die Botschaft des Lebens für den Menschen. Dass wir immer leben werden und nicht sterben, das sagt nicht die heilige Hildegard, das sagt Gott selber. Die Garantie ist Jesus Christus selber. Deshalb habe ich meinen Sohn Mensch werden lassen, spricht Gott Vater. Denn die Botschaft der heiligen Hildegard in all ihren Bildern, die eine auslegen, der heiligen Schrift ist eine ganz große Säule und ganz Kernpunkt ist Jesus Christus, der Erlöser, der Menschgewordene.
take a train out of Bingen through the Rhine Valley on this summer's day. Trek up a steep hill, relieved to find an old sign, Klosterruine, which points to a verdant track into a cool shady grove. Here, remnants of the 12th century monastery, moss-mottled stone walls mostly buried by vines and embedded tree roots, is Hildegard's world. Standing in this moment, with the outlines of another world, time is shapeless, the divide of centuries a blur. Only my mind's eye can see a spirited young woman and flourishing herb gardens. She prepares salves and tonics, attends the sick, listens to the breeze, and finds God in the hills above her. The earth is our mother, she would sing, revere and care for her. If we exploit and savage her, she will be out of balance, and the price will be high. Then, silence for 900 years. I lean against the wall mark at Hildegard's cloister. In the lush shade of an almond tree, hanging fruit voluptuous now, is falling to emptiness, the void, the nothingness. How human to fear the waiting for fulfillment to return. Scattered around me are rotten almond fruits, flies enjoying their feast, the decay fodder for the soil. My eyes scan for her presence. A maiden hair fern, grooved into a crumbling niche, catches my eye, delicate and tenacious. I feel a quickening, like a first flutter of new life. Too often the fragile, the intimate whisper, the lightness of touch, the flicker of a sanctuary lamp, like breath are portals and easily missed. I ponder the rise and fall of my breathing, listen to the murmur of heartbeat. Viriditas, murmurs Hildegard. Hildegard is here. I do not flinch, I expect her, nothing like the grey statue at the abbey, holding the orb and feather. Her presence is intimate, light glows luminous, her arms full of herbs from the garden, and her muddy handmade sandals make me laugh.